2-1. Your region needs to chase capital for your entrepreneurs. No, it doesn't. You're dumb. Or maybe I'm dumb. We're going to fight about it and learn something. Go somewhere today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Hwang. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically, news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. You're in for Builders Live, this monthly conversation on ecosystem building that we're doing with Victor Hwang from Right to Start, Brian Brackeen from Lightship Capital, Maria Underwood, longtime ecosystem builder out of the great state of Birmingham, great state of Alabama.
I claim the city more than the state. So
all right, Birmingham and Alabama. We shout that out. We had a story, a topic that I'm throwing out because in our little pre-session, we got into maybe touch on the thing we might have some disagreement on, and that's a better topic. Talk a little bit about capital and money for ecosystem building and organizing. But first, let's touch on what's working as we start this conversation with each month. Let's do a kind of Maria, Victor, Brian. What's a bright light you're seeing in ecosystem building in your home city, home state, or recent travels? We'll start there. Maria, what do you got of late?
So we are gearing up towards Sloss Tech, and this is going to be my bright light until we hit Sloss Tech because I'm excited about it. So Sloss Tech is at the end of June. It's our big Southeastern Tech Conference. We're just announcing our keynote speakers, and we just added on this year a pitch competition. So talking about funding, we have added in a pitch competition for early stage entrepreneurs, and then the winner is actually going to get to go to Venture Stage Atlanta, which I think is really exciting to see that we are doing something in Birmingham that's then going to let people get kind of on a bigger ecosystem stage from where we are now in Atlanta. So it's like this partnership building within the Southeastern cities. So I think that addition has been really exciting.
Great.
Thank you for the show on the screen up there.
We
Tickets
love
on sale now.
Rogan can ask someone to pull it up. I got to pull it up myself. It's different.
Hey, I'm curious, Maria, what does Sloss mean? Why Sloss?
Great question, because when we talk about it, people are like, sloth tech? Like, are you slow? It's lots of strange questions. So Sloss Furnace is the furnace that built the steel industry in Birmingham. Gosh, Chris, you're on it today.
I know I'm a Birmingham visitor.
Yeah. So Birmingham's known as the Magic City because when the ecosystem discovered here that you could build steel, we had all of the local ingredients to build steel. The city kind of grew up and boomed overnight. So we take that on in the tech space to say we have all the right ingredients here to have the next big tech boom in our city. So Sloss Tech has become our kind of rallying cry.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Victor, what do you got?
A couple weeks ago, I was in the upstate New York and wandered through Buffalo Startup Week, and it was really cool. The two organizers there, Peter Borikowski, Dan Miner, longtime ecosystem builders, and Buffalo Startup Week is still a fairly young activity, but it's been going on now, and just there you go, April 7th through 9th. And it was just fantastic. The energy, the community coming together, and they had people not just from Buffalo, but really across the whole western half of New York State there, which often gets overlooked. Of course, the economy often gets overshadowed by downstate in the city. But just the energy of what's happening in upstate New York. There's, they recently appeared, like I think some ranking somewhere, many rankings out there but they showed they were like in the top 10 for places to start a new business. And so they just there's a lot of great energy and optimism happening in Buffalo, and just happy to see it, and it's good to see it. Good to be there.
Love that. Brian?
It's Black Tech Week season, so really excited about that. We announced last week that Kiki Palmer is going to be our keynote. She's having a hell of a year this year, so super excited about that. Tech is everything, right? That's kind of our big thing this year. So no matter what industry you're in, you should come by. We're going to talk a little bit about capital today. There's two things that we do around capital that I think are important. One, we do VC matching with startups, right? So we have both submit all their information as VCs ourselves, we know who's a good fit for who. And so those meetings tend to yield more results because we're matching both the founders and the funds that they are best fits for. The other thing that we do is something called Biz Dev Day. Last year, we had 200 matches between corporations and startups to get enterprise customers at Black Tech Week. So it's you get a 20, 30-minute kind of intro kind of conversation at the conference, and you can take that and push forward after the conference. But getting the right people, getting to the buyers, people who want to buy from you, huge for startups. And so that's Black Tech Week's coming up this July.
We love that.
I saw Darth Vader there, Brian.
Yes, there's a guy that does a Darth Vader look. Yes, very cool.
An unexpected tie that I can do because my bright light we're 2 weeks out from Techni's Builders Conference, focused very much where I'm moving more and more toward ecosystem storytelling, which maybe we'll touch on. But that is part of the 15th annual Philly Tech Week that we launched so long ago. One, I actually want to touch on the weeks because we're having a conversation internally about the week format and whether that we still need a full week or should, which might be its own conversation. I feel like something shifted for
we talk about that a lot with Sloss Tech as well. So
all right, well, maybe that's so how about this? I want to get to capital as our main topic, but maybe I can actually start with this idea of the signature when you look at what an ecosystem has, we can all probably list out all the things that now at this point there's a checklist, and you can go into probably a place, and whether you know it or not, all 4 of us have a mental math of oh, do they have that? Oh, they got that. Yep, that. And one of them is a event that usually, I think in my experience, kind of doing a couple things. Like it is a rallying cry for people in that home ecosystem, but the thing that would most sensibly, if you had to say your excuse to come to XYZ ecosystem, of course, there'd be more than one, but there's one that is that. And I can remember 15 years ago, starting Philly Tech Week, for us, the week made sense because we were trying to get all of the disparate groups in our ecosystem. We wouldn't have used that word yet, but trying to get them together. And it was just sheer volume was the point. So we, in 2019, which is which we can talk about, peak, 120 events, 25,000 people. That was all the point. And now I'm not sure that is the point anymore. So talk about weeks. Why do we do weeks? Why did weeks become a thing? Why was it week in the late 2010s? Why wasn't it weekend or conference or day? Why did week? Why?
I think it meant that you had enough to do over a week. The proof that I have arrived as an ecosystem enough to put on, let's say, 5 days of content was something, because that wasn't necessarily true for every city at the time.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, it also gives people the ability to spread out their travel option, because most people aren't able to attend a week, I wouldn't think, or don't have the time for it, the bandwidth, the finances to be out of town for a week. So if you've got 5 days of programming and they can't make the Thursday, Friday, maybe they can make Monday, Tuesday.
I think there's something about activating the community. So if you have a week's worth of activities, it's not, and that's why I think these weeks are nice. But it is a lot of effort for sure, which is if you can get, a dozen groups to host their own things, right? And it becomes like a broader celebration of the whole ecosystem. It's not one group that has to organize everything, that you need a central hub, but to allow different partners to do stuff, it becomes a way to activate them. And so one day feels hard to cram it all in, but if it's a week and people are working during the day, so a lot of the stuff becomes evening activities. So you get you got a bunch of different evenings where different groups, different, shops, incubators, accelerators, they can all host different things. So I think it's done in a way to be inclusive, but I get that it can be draining too. It takes a lot of time to go to a bunch of different events.
Yeah, I think there's your point about partnerships. Last year, we saw that for the first time really with Sloss Tech. So 2 years ago, when we first brought it back after COVID, it was a one-day Friday event. What we remembered when we hosted is that in Alabama in the South in the summer, people usually leave half-day Fridays to go to the lake or to the beach. So we lost a lot of that afternoon conference. So then we were like, let's flip it to do half-day Thursday, half-day Friday, and then we can do some cool evening programming Thursday night. We also partner with Generator to do their health tech conference. So you could come in town and go to the Generator Health Tech conference. You could then move into Sloss Tech. And last year, we also saw other organizations around town, other economic development organizations start to plan intentionally meetings and events around Sloss Tech. So while that team wasn't planning the whole week, we just had to plan our portion of it. Other organizations adding their event made it worth. It's more interesting if you're flying or driving in town. It's more than a one-day conference. Like now you get some Generator stuff. Now we did a pitch night with some Shark Tank casting agents, and that was a different organization that put that on. So you get more value than just the ticket conference when other ecosystem organizations start to add on to what you're building.
So two takes. One, I know a handful of regions I feel like I have a degree of intimate knowledge of that there was a pandemic shift in like some habits got broke, a new generation kind of changed. Second, and this is maybe more controversial, maybe you guys will have a push on me. I have this like narrative that a whole bunch of big macroeconomic things are happening in the 2010s. Not just cheap money, not just digital transformation, but there's that big cohort of millennial who I was a part of, who were around the country in a bunch of cities. They did disproportionately show up in cities, and they were disproportionately doing a lot of these like community events that maybe were kind of related to their job. But when you look back, and I put myself in this group, we're doing it because it was like our friends, it was like a vibe. And the week model then like made more sense because you were throwing parties too, and it wasn't like really your job. I think post-pandemic, I think there was a reevaluating of work and work-life balance. And there also is now this next cohort who is now younger. It's a smaller generation, just demographically. But I think there's a different vibe. I think there's less like, we'll just throw a 300-person party for fun that relates to tech. Like now it seems insane to me that that's what we were doing. Our after parties, Philly Tech Week, we're like in a random warehouse and we were doing it. And it was fun. It was cool. And for Startup Found, it was like dope. And it was like subsidized by private equity in fucking New York was subsidizing our parties in a warehouse in North Philly. It's insane now. So I just wonder how much that was just, it can't work like that anymore. And so the week model, as it were, isn't sustainable or just doesn't make sense for now. But am I conflating too many things? Do I sound crazy?
You're like, oh man, get these kids off my lawn. Like, no,
I feel bad on a beef.
I mean, the funding's not there anymore, I don't think.
I think you're saying millennials are getting old.
Yeah, I think.
Well, yes.
You're older.
So they can't party as hard.
Go to bed. I get it, but other people enjoy hanging out at night in a warehouse.
Well, no, hold on. I didn't say I don't enjoy it. I said I'm with Maria's point that like random ass like tech startups would buy the beers at that warehouse now. That's not quite the same anymore. So I think that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the funding's not there on the sponsorship side, on so many startups. I think there's so much competition now. Like the startup ecosystem has done a great job telling everybody that they can start a company and that they can be a founder, but there's not enough money to go around to sustain all of that. So most startups aren't going to throw in money for a keg of beer because they're going to save it to pay their developer. And then the sponsors aren't going to come in and then subsidize that as much because I think we're just in a different corporate landscape at the moment. That's what we're seeing anyways, where we are.
There was a moment there where every corporation really bought into the startup narrative because innovation, it was at the time when innovation was the main differentiator of corporations.
Yep.
And that was, about a decade ago. And if you weren't, if you weren't a corporation using a lean startup canvas to do new product development or creating an innovation division or some kind of internal innovation fund, you were left out. And COVID threw that in a tizzy, and now capital markets are throwing that up. There's a lot of other priorities corporations are dealing with now. I think that was just a unique moment in time for corporate involvement.
Yeah, I do think we've gotten into a point of telling everyone they can be founders, or everyone, like, we don't tell people their babies are ugly, basically. And we kind of keep, at least in smaller ecosystems, we keep supporting companies that aren't going to make it, but putting money in them because we like the founder, or they show up at all the happy hours, so we know them. So we're going to let them win this competition. But at some point, if you have too many people competing for those resources, you don't really have enough to go around. So not to like launch us into the next topic, but if you're looking at funding for that, who are you funding who's actually building the right company versus who are you funding just because you know them because they go to the happy hours? And if there's a limited amount of funds, like how are you being strategic in where that money's going?
Before we transfer, sorry guys,
no, please, yeah.
We want to talk about beer again real quick.
Yeah, just to go back to beer, really.
Warehouse party.
I don't even drink. It's more hilarious. But I think that there are technical reasons that there are different answers here. Many corporations have decided in the pullback they were talking about that they have certain markets that they're focused on. So in Miami, there is no shortage of people that are interested in being in the Southeast or launching in Latin America, and they want to sponsor a variety of things. And so those events are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more and more every single year. And we see that in certain cities. Now, in Cincinnati, when we're not part of people's area of like growth, then it's exactly as Maria and Victor described, right? Less resources. And that's part of a larger kind of problematic narrative about everyone trying to pile on the winners in cities as if they're startups, right? And then leaving out other areas.
Yeah, Brian, to your point though, of how y'all do it at all the Black Tech Weeks, like the intentionality of connecting people that you know are going to fund with those certain founders, like that intentionality is what people are going to keep going for, whether it's a day or a week. I think happy hours are a dime a dozen. Like we don't need them anymore. I think we have too many because it's just easy to put them on. So the events that are going to sustain are the ones that make intentional strategic connections for founders where they get the most value out of it.
You got to work for them.
And it doesn't matter what free drinks are there. It matters, like, did I meet someone who's going to help move my business forward? I think founders are just focused on less waste and like trying to save their own time.
I totally agree.
So I do think this is a really interesting segue to the capital thing. So no, because Brian, I think I actually don't think on that topic we're disagreeing at all. Like and here's my ecosystem take, and Victor, you might even have thoughts on this. I do think you go through phases as an ecosystem, obviously, like any kind of, it's just coalition building, community building we've talked about, and that's not unusual if we're talking about for entrepreneurship or whatever other sub-community you're organizing around. You kind of go through generations, and there's a like discovery phase. Oh, who's even out there? And someone at some point says, we need a directory, and that shows up. And then someone says, oh, what are all the events? We need an event calendar. Like you go through these same things, and every community like ping pongs at the same 7 sentences that comes out of something, and it's healthy. And for a while, the weak model in not only tech and entrepreneurship, but in beer and arts, like it just felt like there was a 2010s moment where a whole bunch of sub communities in cities were like kind of discovering things, and they were all going through that same phase. And the week was just really helpful to have a calendar. We used to print a print magazine for years in Philadelphia and Baltimore, actually, and Delaware and Brooklyn, and all of them. The point was, like, that's an asset. That's a little time capsule of what was going on there. That now post-pandemic feels a little less important to me. And when I look at the cost, we did 1,000-person events to close out Philly Tech Week for years. They didn't actually make any financial sense. And I was carrying kegs of beer in my car, and like it was neat and charming. But looking back, it made no sense. Other than we were like hanging with friends and getting a community together and doing it. And so I think a lot of regional economic development leaders don't realize what was happening back then, which was a lot of people were not doing it because it was their job or because there was a 5-point strategic plan that said it should happen. It was that people were finding each other and building community. And then those founders stuck around. And then suddenly you got a more serious founder. And now you end up with some unicorns. But I think it was about the keg in the back of the car. And now we need a new strategy, because I don't know if everyone wants to do that again, or should for that.
I think there's no them. There is no them, right? So there is a 26-year-old person that was 12 when what you're talking about happened.
Yeah.
And they want their chance at the keg, and they deserve their chance to go to that party. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because you're getting to be a dinosaur, Chris. But I think I think startups went from at that time to being sort of the wave of cool for sure within the startup world was happening, to now I think it's a necessary thing to build like prosperity. It's kind of shifted to like the vibe is much more about like practical resilience than it is about cool and fun. And I think that may be the difference you're talking about. Like, people still care, but they care about it in, I think, a much more serious way. To Maria's point, they're looking for value add, not just can I be a professional ecosystem party goer, which there are people that do that. That's fun. And I've still got free t-shirts from that era. And I remember the .com boom, and there were free when the free t-shirts are rolling, that is a sign that you're in a bubble, right? And when the free t-shirts are gone, people are back to the real thing and they're building the businesses. But I think startup weeks and Buffalo Startup Week, I think there's a sense of like, this is really important. This is real. We've got to fix a lot of stuff to make these businesses more successful. And I think there's just a vibe shift that's definitely happened in the system post-pandemic.
All right. So let's make it then the full capital shift here, because the connection I was going with is more, I felt like there was a different chapter. All right, maybe I'm just old. I push back a little bit. I think a thing shifted that isn't just that I'm old. I think
you're old. You're old-ish, Chris.
You look great. That's what matters.
Yeah. Anyway, all to say, I do think, like, I get the Buffalo Startup Week. I think that totally you go through it. It's so valuable. I look back and I think it's undercounted what those weak models for a lot of cities did. I don't think people totally grasp how much just the like finding each other and the building identity is enormously pays dividends for years, and you don't get that back. It's kind of just like a dividend for years. So let's talk about capital, which I didn't expect to be the topic today, but might be the lead, because I hate this conversation. And so maybe we can fight about it. It'll be good, because we're just finishing up actually tonight in Baltimore is the last of our this year's. We do these realist startup dinners. So every quarter, every Q1 of every year, our newsroom for a decade curates lists of startups 3 years or younger. We do get a Victor. We get a call out for the free T-shirt index, Victor. It's already got a brand from the comments. Shout out for that. Yep. Yeah. I do like data. Every quarter, list early stage companies we're following in the markets we report on, and then we gather them for kind of like dinner, good conversation. Actually, great off the record and on the record discussions. Anyway, we've done versions of that in 15 cities. I have never been told anything other than all our region needs is more capital. Everyone is always saying this. I think this is dumb as hell. I'll make the strongest hot take, and then Brian Brackeen can yell at me. I think this is dumb as hell. I think your region does not need capital. I think focusing on attracting capital is dumb, because capital is not interested in boundaries. It's interested in returns. And so you're maximizing the performance and the stickiness of your entrepreneurs.
Certain capital is tied to where you live,
which is it's economic development related. Well, so that I think ends up being that's not. Well, so we'll talk about capital money, but the seriousness of your entrepreneurs, matchmaking them with people seems different to me, but trying to drag capital to your region strikes me as bizarre, because if the founders aren't there, the capital doesn't care. And so for me, it's not a chicken and the egg situation. The priority is growing and retaining more established entrepreneurs. I know there's some takes in there. I will stop. Commence yelling at me.
Can I ask a clarifying question? What is capital to you? What is the definition of capital to you in this context?
And in this context, it would be pools of funds that are not economic development strategies, subsidized by taxpayers, but capital would be pools of capital that are investing in private businesses.
Private capital for private businesses.
Yeah. Private capital for private businesses. That's way more succinct than I was, Brian.
No, that's all right. That's all right. So I'm gonna answer. I'm gonna start my rebuttal, sir, with a story.
Love that.
And so I was recently working with a team trying to attract a company to Cincinnati. Our local attraction firm, subsidized by the state, they don't invest in companies to move them there, right? Their big thing is everything else: training, maybe help you maybe finance some equipment, help you find a building, all the other things you might need. But to your kind of earlier point, the capital, private capital, should be coming from other places, and so they've drilled into their people that don't talk about capital or capital is not some of all the other things that are really, really important. What happens is they don't understand that to a founder, that's all they're thinking about almost every day, right? In fact, they would prefer not to be thinking about capital. They would love to spend more time with their build teams and development teams and QA. Like, they would love to work on the business, but they have to work on the capital problem 50, 60, 80% of the time, depending on where your burn rate is, right? And so you think about your customer is the companies we're talking about. And if that customer is spending 80% of their time thinking about one topic, why would you build your entire organization around topic 2? Like, that is not putting our like startup hats on. That's not how you build a great business. What does the customer want? How can I provide that to them? The customer wants capital. How do I provide capital to them?
And Maria, jump, and I won't linger here, but my initial answer to that is if you're not able to do it. And I don't know of the real great regional case study strategy of they brought the capital first before the serious entrepreneurs were there to do it. So I view it as a false kind of premise that looks good to present to your board of your economic development authority or your ESO. It's a great slide deck. Everyone cheers that we're going to bring capital to the region. And you start with the day, you fly them in and you do some meetings. That I'm fine with. That's different. That's like meetings. Of course you want to be generating meetings, but we're going to get an office here. You have to bend so much. It doesn't make structural sense. So that's why I think when I hear it, it just strikes me as it's not real. I don't, but.
Yeah, I think we lean too much into letting founders focus on capital before they focus on perfecting the customer model, before they focus on making sure their business is sustainable, that somebody wants it. I've seen a lot of waste of funding of someone trying something for too long and it just isn't going to work. And more money is not going to help that it not work. And you do need money to get startup costs done. Like, you can't pay a developer with no money. You do need funds to get off the ground. So I do understand the need to do that. But I think we let people think they need to raise $4 million in a pre-seed round when really they could probably do it with a lot less and bootstrap and specify and make their customers a lot happier earlier on, make their product work a lot better on a shoestring, and then go on and expand. And then when we give them that 4 million, we know that their business is going to work. So I do think that's a challenge of focusing on bringing VC in. On the other side, you have to have money in order to make a product, in order to start a company in a lot of senses. So we do a lot of fly-in essentially of VCs here in Birmingham and in Alabama. Of we're going to bring VCs who have never been to the ecosystem or who don't know our founders. And if our founders can't get on a plane to go just knock on doors, we're going to bring them in. I think that's an effective strategy that kind of mines the gap between, we're not trying to recruit VCs to move offices here necessarily, but we want them to know that when they're looking at founders, there are good ones to look at in Birmingham. So how do we put our founders in front of VCs who aren't from here, whether or not they have offices here? And I think that's the most economical way to go about it.
I would I've been involved in sort of a number of efforts on capital formation in different parts of the country. And I think the approach of trying to attract capital from other places, it's fine if it's sort of a, making matchmaking. I think that's great. But it fundamentally is a zero-sum game if you look at capital that way. And capital is not a zero-sum game, but people treat it as such, which is there's like a finite amount of capital out there, and that you've got to attract the capital from elsewhere in. When the real issue, there's so much money that's not capital. There's so much money sitting in places where it's stagnant, right? Or stagnant, or just, in the public equity markets or the public bond markets, or some place where it's not generating innovative production. And the real question is, why isn't more money allocated towards capital in places where it needs to be? And so there's a capital markets problem. And so one of the ways that you can tackle that is to think of capital as sort of like a middleware problem, where you've got sort of a big pool of money and you've got the businesses that need it. Jamie Dimon before has said, we've got trillions of dollars in Wall Street that wants to go to entrepreneurs and small businesses. Where do we put it? And so if you think of it as there's a huge amount of money that wants to go into startups, why is the middleware broken? Why is the plumbing of the system so clogged up? And so the way to unclog that is to think about how capital gets built, and to look at the people creating capital. So folks like Brian, people making funds, people building funds, and the difficult entrepreneurial energy that goes into fund formation. And so you were asking, Chris, how's it been done before? Well, the greatest story is Israel and the story of the Yosma Fund. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but Israel, in the early 90s, the government created a fund to spark the development of the venture capital industry. And that fund today is essentially the godparent of the entire venture capital industry in Israel. Almost every major fund in Israel got money at the time from the Yosma Fund. And that model was copied in Latin America through a group called the Multilateral Investment Fund, which became the godmother, they'll call it, of all the different 200 some venture capital funds across the whole Latin America region. And the way they did it was not by trying to subsidize capital. They were actually trying to spark capital formation in different parts. So they would be like the early anchor money if people are trying to set up a new fund, they would be the money that says, we will help you take the first risk in, and then we will help you connect into the ecosystem of other people building funds across the entire region. And so that effort has been done in only a few places in the US. And now more and more, some folks have been trying to do that with the SSBCI stuff, but that often gets caught up in a lot of red tape and bureaucracy. And but folks have been trying, and there's a great example in the state of the Renaissance Fund, Chris Ryzik, who started this fund, and he's been at it for 15 years, and he's built one of the best fund of funds in the country. And they invest their nationally competitive fund of funds, but they do a special focus on being in Michigan and helping connect startups with the bigger capital markets. And they host 2 major events a year where they bring in all the different venture funds they know across the country, and they fly into Michigan and meet the funds there. They meet the startup companies there. And so there's a way to do it that focuses on capital formation and matchmaking, as opposed to trying to subsidize or trying to move money from elsewhere in.
In fact, Chris is also a great DJ, for the record.
He's phenomenal.
Yeah. I think too, founders. So when I was leading the economic development organization, where we were recruiting founders into Birmingham, I cannot tell you the amount of calls, and it was more than probably 80%, where if I talked to them, they said, well, the thing I'm really looking for is capital. So if you can pay me to move there, I'll move there. I mean, there were founders willing to move to Birmingham for $5,000, $10,000, which we weren't giving. So that it was irrelevant. But I think economic development folks hear that directly from founders, and then they think, okay, if I could just give this person $5,000, they'll move here, and then that's a goal off my list. But the problem is they get there and they don't have customers who are going to actually use their product, or there's not additional follow-on capital, or they're still having to travel to do that additional capital raise. So I think some of it is on the founder's side of maybe not trying to like game that system too much. Because I knew people were like, well, I'm not going to move there because the Philadelphia organization will pay me $10,000 to move here, or I'll move to Tulsa to get the remote in Tulsa money. And then you're still having to travel. So I don't know if there was too much money in the ecosystem to like recruit people in the beginning, and that's filtering out now. But the only thing founders wanted, the first thing they would say was, I'll move there for capital.
Can we, Oh, go ahead, Victor.
Well, I was going to say the challenge with all this is a lot of people they don't realize that capital is there's a full capital life cycle, right? For the first $5,000, all the way to your early angel and first round funds, all the way to the follow-on funds, which have to be big national players, all the way to the IPO markets or the merger markets. And when the IPO markets and the merger markets close up, as they have recently, it affects everything in that full capital life cycle. And so a lot of regions will focus on, well, how do we just get the angel funds going, or how do we get the Series A funding going, without realizing that the bigger challenge downstream is going to be, how do you connect to the bigger capital markets across the whole country? You think of it like a freeway system. You need on-ramps onto that full freeway system. And then how do you tie that into how you can actually get liquidity? So, and that's only for venture capital, keep in mind, if you tap into that, which is 1% of all businesses created. And so 1% of businesses created that are looking for money, they're looking for investors, they're looking for follow-on rounds, they're looking for eventual exits, because you're forced onto that track. That's not necessarily what works for, if you're looking at entrepreneurship writ broad, like, some of the work we're doing at Right to Start, then you have to think about, how do you spur capital formation broadly in the types of capital that are not necessarily of that same capital market system. So there's like a whole different, it's a meta problem that works on many, many levels. And I think people often think of it as like one track, and it's just not. It's just, and they don't even think of the whole track when they think of that track.
So to tie these unexpected two topics of, the week festival kind of community thing to capital, a theme of these conversations has been how ecosystem building has kind of marched into this very established tent of economic development. I think a lot of us have like, there's whole terms, there's all conferences about, IEDC, and it's been great. And Victor, thinking of you in particular, your leadership in kind of threading between this very nascent field of ecosystem building with a very established and well-regarded industry of economic development, and how those things are coming seem really interesting. I think a lot about behavioral economics was a little subfield of economics, and then over time that field kind of influenced all of economics. I think that's I picture this group doing that kind of work of, there are lessons across them all. My capital push, and maybe one of the through lines that I want, is I just think folks misunderstand why that would ever work. And like we've said, flying people in, matching, that's why I think a Sloss Tech, a Buffalo Startup Week, Philly Tech Week, Black Tech Week, those are very good strategies. I think it's insane if your region or state does not have a clearest on-ramp. And I think sometimes in market, people lose sight of what those sorts of things are supposed to be for. You're like, we just need, as part of our narrative, what is the thing of, if you were to start in this ecosystem, you would come here. And it's top of funnel strategy, right? And it's how you then do that. And that might be where you could sensibly bring in customers, or you could bring in investors. Matchmaking makes sense to me. It's this idea of we're going to get an office here and we're going to win it like we're going to win a manufacturing plant, just strikes me as illogical and insane. And so I think the extension of my hot take is, if you have founders in your ecosystem who say, I have to be near early stage capital, I think, depending on what stage your ecosystem's at, you have to say, then I think you should go. And I wish you well. And I hope you someday open a field office here, if you really think that's true. And I think there are some companies that is true. And if you're certain kind of consumer tech, maybe you really should go to one of those hubs. And I don't think every region should chase that. Someone could tell me I'm crazy on that. Brian, maybe I feel like you're reacting.
Yeah, no, you're not crazy. And the scenario you have painted is universally correct. Opening a Andreessen Horowitz office in whatever middle America city doesn't change that. But anybody who's serious about this knows that's the case. So I would offer to you the scenario that you're painting. No serious person really digs in and comes to that conclusion. That's like something you say at a cocktail party or whatever. That is not no one's producing a report that says we have to get Andreessen Horowitz open an office in Lodi, Michigan. That is no one's writing that report.
Yeah. I think when we say bring capital here, it's we've got to bring investor eyeballs and awareness to founders that are in Birmingham. That does not mean. Yeah.
That's what everybody university means. There's a second I think, more serious position, which is Victor's, which is how does a city or state use its bond capabilities to create a program where they fund or seed 20 new venture funds in Birmingham, right? Which then allows Birmingham to say, hey, that early stage person, you just said that, hey, go there, move there. Do that in Birmingham so that people say, move to Birmingham where they have all these new funds. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think of it as, go ahead, Maria.
I was going to just on that quickly. We have a really successful fund here in Birmingham called the Alabama Futures Fund. And it was a VC, and it recruited founders from across the state, and they gave large checks to founders who would move here. And then they like hands-on worked with them to make them great companies and build sustainable, customer bases here. But the requirement was that the funders had to move here. So I think in that sense, that was like a homegrown fund that recruited people. I know ecosystems are doing it across the country. So I think in that scenario only can we like kind of home grow some VC firms and then see the economic development results that folks want to see.
I think everything is ultimately human capital and human capital networks. And if you look at the way like development banks were set up, like last century, you had like the World Bank, you had the Inter-American Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank. The development banks were all set up to build the infrastructure of the 20th century. So electricity, utilities, even stock markets, capital exchanges. So the question then is, all right, if those were the development institutions of the 20th century, what are the development institutions we need for the 21st century? And so I think there's actually a need for something like entrepreneurship development banks. Like basically they build the infrastructure of the modern entrepreneurial economy. And so those are, instead of power lines and power cables, you're actually building ecosystems and the capital markets of the entrepreneurial economy. So you think of all the things that we're talking about here, like how do you spur, not just subsidize one fund, but how do you spur the development of 20 funds within a region that actually serve the types of companies in that region? So you're not talking about Andreessen Horowitz, let's say. In a lot of regions, they're going to be companies that know how to scale manufacturing, which is very different, right? Like you think about the Rust Belt states, they need firms that know how to do hard product manufacturing, scaling up of manufacturing production, or companies doing retail products. Like how do you scale retail companies? And so the capital markets that support that and the funds that know how to invest in retail product scaling, those are very different necessarily than getting like 20, Andreessen Horowitz's or Sequoia Capitals in a region. And so that kind of like deep thinking about what does the infrastructure need and how do you build from scratch, that has not happened. And I feel like that's a conversation. I think our leaders in society are not doing that. But in weaving together, like you were saying, Chris, the economic development conversation with the entrepreneurship conversation, I think that's the next step is if we know that economic development has moved to the entrepreneurial world. All right, now what do we need in terms of economic development institutions, and what do they really have to build next? And I think these capital markets institutional structures like entrepreneurship development banks or other types of similar institutions are what we need next. What that looks like, every region is going to have to figure out what it looks like on its own.
If we go into that conversation next, we need to invite Corey Bailey of Upsurge Baltimore in, because they just merged with an economic development organization. Yeah, and I think they're pioneering what that will look like in the future. So there's my plug for Corey.
Friend of the show, Corey. I'm gonna lose you in a sec, but the little trap though, maybe I'll go back to Maria's calling the baby ugly, Brian's point. Like, there's a few threads here that I've seen people fall in this trap. Someone has the line that sometimes when you ask for advice, you're actually asking for permission. And I've seen that ESO, EDO, that like, we gathered entrepreneurs. They told us they needed this. Two traps that I see I have fallen into that I think it's very sensible. Successful entrepreneurs sometimes don't actually know how they were successful. They just really do not know. A bunch of things happened. They suddenly are worth a boatload of money and they're thought of as brilliant, but it was market hit, this hit, and they ended up there, and they can sometimes trick themselves in thinking that they have answers for everything. And sometimes those ESOs gather those folks who are really early and aren't yet serious, to your point, Maria. And so they might say it's hard for me to get capital, and it might be a different reason than that they can't get capital. I think direct flights matter as much as whether someone's coming in. But if you gather a group of entrepreneurs who are at a certain kind of stage, they might say capital, but they might be talking about a different thing in their heart, whether or not. So kind of parting shots here. We're now going to connect this, like the weeks of community organizing, gathering, focusing effort, and capital. Any last kind of parting shots about why we ended up on those two topics?
I think direct flights are a big deal. We had our quarterly team retreat of Right to Start just in Albany a couple weeks ago, and it was hard to get people from all across the country to Albany, and so it affects a region. It affects the connections, the matchmaking, the human networks a ton. I will say that Albany, the state capital of New York, is a beautiful building. We've gone to probably like 25 or so state capitals now. We take team photos at them. Just a plug for the New York State Capitol building. It's really spectacular.
I like that.
Yeah.
Parting shots.
Yeah, direct flights for us too. We finally got Chicago and New York from Birmingham. We've had DC, obviously. We don't have any out to the West Coast, and that's a challenge. For all the obvious reasons that you'll know. And I think we're on the capital conversation, because we're starting all of these weeks that are coming up where people are going to look for capital. They're like traveling to Black Tech Week, to Philly Tech Week, to Sloss Tech, try to find investors. So I think we're in tech summer right now, and it's what's on people's minds. But we're about to hit another really uncertain economic time, just like 2020. Where capital may dry up, it may be paused. And I think there are a lot of founders who are probably trying to do it now and front load and get ahead of whatever's to come next.
Direct flights. I know it wasn't about that, but I'm going to take that one up too. I would love to see an index of direct flights in a city and then how their startup ecosystem is performing, or even their business ecosystem in general.
That'd be interesting data.
I think it's probably a good
Chris, write an article on that.
I might be able to pull that together.
Yeah, I think it's a rich get richer, poor get poorer thing, which is the moment you lose that, you start to spiral, right? Like you're just off the grid for a lot of people.
Access to capital is like the big umbrella of what a direct flight is.
Yeah,
can you
right.
easily go raise money, or can somebody easily come find you?
Big plug for Ohio. We take some of that liquor money and we actually subsidize flights to Ohio cities so that they have more direct flights. So we'll say to American Airlines, hey, we will always buy 40 seats on this flight. If you sell out, don't charge me. But if there's not enough, we'll pay for the other 40, just to make sure that there are enough flights to, like, San Francisco, to your point, Maria.
Interesting. Well, then you do concentrate those existing hubs. That is a very interesting thread. Unfortunately, we're way over time. So this was this month's Builders Live. We connected kind of community organizing through a week model to capital. How do you chase it or not? We got somewhere interesting. Thank you, Victor, Maria, and Brian. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Chris. See you guys.
Thank you.